All right, let's talk about a phrase you might have heard, the Iron Sun. It's this really powerful metaphor that honestly gets right to the heart of Kim Jong-il's rule over North Korea. The Hermit Kingdom. It sounds intense, right? But what does it actually mean? Let's dive in and unpack it.
Okay, so this is straight from the state propaganda playbook. It's a simple line, but man, is it effective. The idea is that the leader isn't just a guide or a president. No, he's the actual source of life for the nation, just like the sun is for a flower. The message is crystal clear. Without him, the country just withers and dies. It's a story all about creating total, absolute dependence. But here's the twist. What happens when that life-giving sun, that thing that's supposed to provide warmth and light, is actually forged from cold, hard iron? That's the core question we're tackling. We're about to pull back the curtain on a state built on this massive contradiction, an ideology that promised light but delivered unyielding, inflexible control.
So first things first, let's really dig into the sun part of this whole equation. Because to really get why the iron grip was so strong, you have to understand how the state built this enormous, all-encompassing cult of personality around its leader, all based on the national idea of juche, or self-reliance. And look, we're talking about something way beyond just political loyalty here. The propaganda machine kicked into overdrive, basically elevating Kim Jong-il to the status of a near god. He was the literal center of their universe. If the harvest was good, that was because of his incredible wisdom. If a factory hit its quota, oh, that was his brilliant guidance. His very presence was portrayed as being absolutely essential for the country's survival.
So that's the sun. Now, for the iron. How did this seemingly life-giving force become so hard, so rigid? Well, a huge piece of that puzzle is a state policy that became the absolute backbone of the regime, and it's called Songun. Songun, or military first, is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the official state policy that puts the Korean People's Army in the #1 spot. Not just as an important institution, but as the most important and powerful part of the entire country, above all other parts of society.
And in the real world, what did this mean? Well, it meant the military got first dibs on everything: the best food, the fuel, the funding. The rest of society was basically told to look to the army as their model for discipline and sacrifice. Every single decision, whether about farming or industry, was viewed through the lens of national defense. This policy is what forged that iron core of the regime.
But here's the thing. While the state was pouring all of its energy into building this ironclad military, a truly devastating shadow was falling across the land.
This period is known inside North Korea as the Arduous March, and it was an absolute catastrophe, one of the worst humanitarian disasters of its time. See, with all the resources being funneled to the military, and with the collapse of support from the Soviet Union, the country's ability to just feed its own people completely fell apart. It led to mass starvation, and it was the direct, devastating consequence of putting ideology ahead of survival.
I mean, the contrast here is just staggering, isn't it? The state propaganda is painting this picture of a prosperous, powerful nation led by a benevolent sun. But the reality for millions of people was a ruined economy and horrific starvation. It's this massive, tragic gap between the story the regime told about itself and what its people were actually forced to live through.
So this brings up a really critical question. With the entire system failing so profoundly, how in the world did the regime hold on to power?
Think about it. When the promise of a good life is replaced by the reality of starvation, how does a government stop its people from rising up? The answer is the final pillar of the Iron Sun. You build a surveillance state that sees and hears absolutely everything.
This was an entire architecture of control, built piece by piece. First, you seal the country off from all outside information, total media control. Second, you turn citizens into informants, encouraging them to spy on their neighbors, even their own family members. Third, you create official neighborhood watch units, these groups called Inmanbon, that monitor every single household. And finally, you enforce it all with the constant, terrifying threat of labor camps and public executions for the tiniest sign of dissent.
So let's bring all these pieces together. You have the godlike cult of personality, the devastating human cost, and this relentless machine of control. Together, they paint the full, chilling picture of the Iron Sun's legacy.
It all really rests on these three pillars. Songun, the military first policy, was the iron fist of the ideology. The famine was the tragic, and you could say inevitable, price that people paid for that ideology. And the surveillance state? That was the grim machine built to keep that fist clenched, even as the nation was starving.
And this brings us right back to our central metaphor.
For the regime, the Iron Sun was a source of ideological heat, a focal point for national identity. But its unyielding nature, its demand for absolute priority, cast a long, dark, and permanent shadow over the lives of its people.
And that is the legacy that endures. A system designed for total, permanent control. And it leaves us with this really haunting question, not just about the past, but about the future too. How does a nation, how do its people, ever truly step out from the shadow of an iron sun?